All right, so today I am telling the story of, I've got one of two stories to tell. Let me flip a coin or something. I don't have a coin, but I've got a USB stick. So if it lands on the SanDisk side, I'll tell the South Africa story. If it lands on the Switch side, I'll tell the Firepower and Film. There we go. SanDisk. So that's South Africa. Oh, I've got a prop for this as well. Let me get it. All right, here's the prop. It'll be very relevant later. So I'm just going to sit that down carefully. A lovely carved warthog. This was carved by Zulus from KwaZulu-Natal, which is a region in South Africa. Let's just sit you nicely there, Pumbaa. Very good. So my dad is a special effects supervisor. He's done very well in that role. When I was born and when I was a tiny kid, he wasn't a supervisor. He was just a special effects man, just a man. But he was working for a range of productions and largely the BBC quite early on. But then he got out of that and then did a whole bunch of things. It's been a very mixed bag of work. He eventually became a supervisor, and nowadays he does a lot of work for Warner Brothers. He's done stuff for Disney, Netflix, Amazon, etc. It's been really interesting seeing that progression and an education in and of itself, kind of like living around it. It's given me opportunities to do things and, to go onto sets and meet the people that work behind it and meet actors and stuff. And I did trainee work as well. And yeah, it's been a lot. Now, for South Africa, there was one particular film or series, rather, called To the Ends of the Earth. And I'm just going to get my facts right about this. Let me get the timing. Yeah, so it was a show featuring Benedict Cumberbatch before he was massive. And the first episode aired in July 2005. So that gives you the time period. Now, they were filming in a place called Richards Bay, but it's kind of in the southeast area of South Africa. And they'd built like this kind of containery warehousey thing over a part of the port, and they had this massive ship rig thing. So it wasn't a real ship, but it had this interior that was specifically designed for the period. So I think it was like an 1800s film. Yep, set in 1812. Now my dad was going to be out there for a while, and it was going to be quite sad being away from him for that long. So my parents decided that we would all go out there, and what they did was they booked a villa. So we stayed in this really nice villa in KwaZulu-Natal, and we were there for longer than we were supposed to be because a few unfortunate things happened. So while we were out there, my mum broke her back. I don't know the technical specifics of it, but she was in hospital for a while. My dad also slipped and banged his head while like trying to move down some concrete things. No, he was trying to get onto like a raft in Richards Bay, and I think he banged on something and his hand went through like some metal. It was this whole thing. I had some flare-ups, some really early flare-ups of medical problems while I was there. It ended up being like I think like a month-long period, maybe 3 or 4 weeks in total, which doesn't sound like a lot, but when you're a kid and when there's so much happening in that time frame, again, it's like an education in and of itself. So we flew out there. It was a long journey. I can't really remember all of the flights. When we got there, though, I remember us pulling up at the villa in a car, and it had a security guard because it's South Africa. And if you don't know much about South Africa, it's a really unique place in the world. Its political dynamics just feel like so familiar and so wildly different than anywhere else. Its security, likewise, its racism culture is completely different. It's a weird thing to explain. I don't really want to be the random British white guy that tries to explain it on behalf of South Africans, but all you need to know is it's a really honest country and a really broken country at the same time, but it's also beautiful. Like, amongst all of the problems, it's just got some of the most incredible landscapes that I've ever seen. I might be able to put a picture up of this might be an after safari or something. We were just like having a drink on top of a mountain somewhere. And the place just has the most unique feeling ever. I mean, I remember when we would drive down roads, it would just be hours and hours of just the same thing. I don't know how they did it, like all these like fresh forests, empty road, and then randomly you just get to a point where it's just completely like tribal all of a sudden, and then you go back to being like this semi-manufactured landscape, and amongst all of this like natural beauty. It was a really interesting place. Anyway, when we pulled up to the villa, we were greeted by a security guard, and I shook his hand, and I think it was a special handshake that my dad had tried to teach me. I can't remember what it was, but it was like some kind of like click thing that we did, and it was kind of like a nice introduction. We quickly learned as well that around the villa there were a lot of monkeys. I'm now realizing when saying that could be interpreted in a very bad way. No, I mean literally monkeys, like literal animals would come and visit into the villa, and they would be looking for food. There was one monkey in particular that was missing a hand. I think he always turned up with like one hand. He was either missing it or it had like formed incorrectly. So we always recognized him, like whenever he would come and say hi, he would just kind of be there with his little disability. So that's how we always recognized him. Becoming familiar with the wildlife was also really interesting because there was a pool at the villa, and I remember every morning we had a bit of a joke that there'd be be a different collection of wildlife in the pool. You'd wake up one morning and it'd be like the biggest spider and all sorts of other bugs you've ever seen. Next morning it'd be like a weird exotic beetle just floating around and all sorts of other things. One time I had a bath. I think I was having a bath with my brother. Can't really remember, but there was like bubble bath, right? And I noticed that there was all these little black dots in the bubbles. And what we realized was that the water pipe that was giving the water to the bath must have been broken somewhere, because all those black dots were ants. It had just been infested with ants. So there were ants floating everywhere in the water. So that was fun. Like, I remember my dad saying as well that at night he remembers feeling stuff touching his face, and then he turned the light on and realized that there was like a little infestation of bugs crawling on the ceiling above him during the night. Wonderful. But we were there effectively just to have a bit of a holiday while my dad was working. So I remember he would show us around. We eventually went to Richards Bay where they were doing the filming. And this is where I got to see my first ever actor, which was Benedict Cumberbatch. Again, way before he was the name that he is now. And it's a very distinctive memory. We were kind of walking down the pier. There was one building and someone walking in these long kind of white robe-like clothes going kind of perpendicular across the building. And my mum pointed down and said, like, look there, that's an actor. And I was like, oh, wow. Because, you know, as a kid, you're like so impressed, like, wow, an actor. Little did we know what Benedict would eventually develop into, the worldwide superstar A-list celebrity that he is. Interestingly, during that South Africa filming phase, Benedict was kidnapped. And a lot of people don't know about that because they don't really talk about it on interviews and stuff, but he was carjacked, and that seems to have been what happened. So Benedict and I think a female member of the cast were both taken out at gunpoint, but they were eventually let go. I'm not sure if we were out there when that specific event happened, but it was the same phase. I have like little fleeting moments of memories. My dad had like some kind of driver that would help him out, and me and my brother were in the car with him, and he was kind of showing us around the area, and we stopped off at one of my dad's temporary offices, and I think there's a picture of me and my brother with him in there. But I have a vague memory of us like stopping off at like a water hole, and I don't know why we were there. We were either waiting for something or just looking out at the water, and the driver said something like, here in South Africa, we have a saying, you learn something new every day, or something like that. And it was just, you know, sweet little things like that. For fun, there was a point where my dad was driving a pickup truck down some dusty roads, like very savannah-y roads, and he let me and my brother sit in the back of the pickup, which is very fun and also kind of dangerous, you know, if you're not strapped down. So he didn't go too fast, but he was driving off and we were sitting in the back watching as we went. And yeah, my mum actually, when we talk about that, my mum is upset that she wasn't there for that bit as well, because it would have been nice to share those memories with her. I think she broke her back getting out of the shower, one of the showers in the villa. And I remember we went to see her in hospital as well. We got her like little balloons and stuff, get well soon, which actually kept the air in them all those years, even to the modern day. I'm not sure if she still got them or not, but yeah, that was crazy. Back then, I was also obsessed with gemstones and stuff, and I had a book about South African gemstones. And when I look in my reading nook now, I keep every book that I have, and there's like some really pristine ones about South Africa, and the dirtiest one is the one about gemstones, so clearly I was reading it all the time. So there was one point where we went on safari, which is great. We got to see all different kinds of animals. You know, the lions come right up to the door as well, which is kind of freaky, but also really cool. You know, giraffes, zebras, all sorts. And at the end of the safari, as we were kind of driving out, we passed by this Zulu area, and the Zulus know that there are tourists that pass by, so they put on a display and they do a dance for you as you're going by, and they've got like drums and stuff, and they're just looking like they're having a great time. So they come up to the door and they kind of hope for some donations. So they were actually quite surprised with us because we gave them a lot of oranges. We had a whole bunch of them, and they got really excited. So as we gave them the oranges, they were like, more, like trying to see how much we could give them. But they were really friendly, and they were all very smiley as well. There was a point, I'm not sure if it was the same day, it might have been as we were coming home from the safari, but we were going down one of these extremely long roads, and we came to a fork in the road. And in the middle of the fork, there were two guys that were carving wood and painting, because they were making figurines like this, sculptures. They were doing all different kinds of animals. Now, for some reason, I was not feeling well. I now know, looking back, I was having a vestibular migraine, something I've had to live with all my life. And I have this very distinctive visual memory of being in the back left seat of the car, kind of having my head turned sideways, feeling really sick. The door opened, happen, and I'm looking out towards these guys in the fork of the road right next to us as he's slapping black paint onto, I believe it was a long alligator piece, but they were also making 2 of these for us. So I was just kind of there. It's a really surreal memory, just like head spinning, feeling extremely nauseous, and just watching these guys just skillfully flay wood like it's nothing, like it was just coming off like butter, and just slapping this paint on. So we brought 2 warthogs. We would have liked to have gotten the alligator, but it was way too big to bring back. So because they're all handmade, there's a larger one and a smaller one, and this is the smaller one that I've taken. I really wanted to keep one for myself, so I took it recently to my room. I took the smaller one as well, not to be greedy, and also because I'm the younger brother. Over time, the tusks or parts of them broke off, so I've had to super glue them back on. But still, this is something I look after because it's quite, special. Now, as for living in the villa, I mean, we took comfort things. We brought a GameCube to South Africa to play that while we were there, which was fun. But security was a big concern, and it probably still is a concern. And my dad was worried about them breaking in and either taking me or my brother or just hurting us or whatever. So at night, the bedroom that I stayed in, my dad would block off the doorway with a bookcase or something. I can't really remember. So I would effectively be barricaded in the house. Interestingly, I've always had something for Africa. I don't know why. Maybe there's some like colonial genetics buried somewhere in me. No, it's not like that. It's always been like a really beautiful place. And The Lion King was my favorite film growing up. So I was always super interested in that. So cultural things like this are something I would like to, look after and preserve, even if not just for sentimental reasons, but because I think it's got some good value to it. Cultural value. Funnily enough, years later while doing all this YouTube stuff, I've made friends on my Discord from around the world, and one of them, by the username of Floof, or infamous Floof, was sailing around the world with his family. He's much younger than I am. I think he's in school now in the US, but I believe at some point they stopped off at Richards Bay, which is really interesting, kind of like how it's such a small place, but the universe has a funny way of like tangling people's experiences together. There's just something kind of transcendental about the whole experience, because as a kid, especially as one that daydreams as much as I do, where the lines between dream and reality aren't always so clear, being kind of thrown into a place like that that's just so adventurously the opposite of life back in suburban London in England, it was an experience like nothing else. It really made you feel like you were on another planet. And I feel like it's very formative in that way, and I've always kind of felt like it contributed so much towards me hating school back home so much, because I had a lot of problems where I had friends, but I never wanted to be in school. I had this high sense of justice against like power tripping teachers. I would stand at the gates and maybe cry sometimes because I just wanted to be outside. I would pace up and down the field because I didn't want to be there, like an itch that could never be scratched, to be outside, just to be free and moving around the world. I don't know how much of that is just genetics and personality, and maybe other kids that don't go through things like that are just used to, the everyday. But I think for me and for my brother, we'd kind of been like exposed to scenarios like that and then put in boxes afterwards with like old power tripping ladies that are so small and condensed and just unjustified that it just didn't feel right. Like, that's not where we should have been. My brother actually, I think, failed his 11 plus or SATs. It's the test you do before you go to secondary school. And I think in part because, or as my mum said the other day to me, that as soon as we got back from South Africa, we just flew straight off again to Spain. So I think collectively, we've never really cared about the crummy education system controlling our lives. Looking back on it, I think it does go some way to explaining where my attitude came from about life, never wanting to be pinned down into one place. Which is weird because I don't really like traveling now. We've traveled quite a lot, but I don't know. I'm only 28. I feel like I've already got it all out of my system. We've, fed squirrels in the volcanous hills of Fuerteventura. We've been in a helicopter down, had lunch in the Grand Canyon. That was fun. We've stayed in really nice places and really not so nice places. The nice place would be the Grand Del Mar. I'm pretty sure I was there when Trump turned up once. We were doing a walk around the grounds. And as we did so, there was a blacked-out vehicle that turned up. This is way before the presidency stuff. Blacked-out vehicle turned up with like Trump 15 on the license plate. So I don't know if it was him or a family member, but Grand Del Mar has got a massive golf course. So yeah, it's really interesting when you look back at things like that. I've been around the Mediterranean. We've chased dolphins in Gibraltar. I've fed dolphins in Florida. That's something a lot of people do, but rocket launches. We've done a lot in Florida. I've been there like 20, 30 times because we had a family home out there for a while. We've only just sold it actually. So it's a weird thing because I'm not so interested in traveling anymore, but I do think it's a really important thing for kids to do with their family. I would have absolutely despised it if I had done that traveling with other kids or like with a group like a school or something. I think that it's a really powerful thing to do as a family like that. like adventurous things together. But for things like the South Africa, it was difficult, as I said. Like, I think my mum was like in a wheelchair when we were on the plane coming back, and like it hadn't been an easy trip for anyone. My granddad actually had to come out and help, and I remember us being so excited, like when he finally turned up at the villa. Granddad, way. So here's another little story as well. We would pass the time sometimes by doing like paper airplane competitions in the villa. So we would design our planes and fly them, and that was really fun, like trying different styles. And I remember my dad was speaking to our security guard who was thinking about like making a security business of his own around the area because there were a lot of villas there that needed looking after. So my dad decided to help him out and came up with the idea of like a business called paper plane security, with the idea being that instead of just like handing leaflets out for people, you would do it in the form of a paper plane. So it'd be a kind of cute thing. You could throw it over the gates if you couldn't get in, or you could just leave a paper plane there instead of a regular leaflet or something. I don't know exactly what happened with that, but I think the guy ended up doing okay for a while because he would call up my dad and like thank him and just like check in on him like every year or something, which was really sweet afterwards. We always made a bit of a joke that he probably spent all the money he earned calling just to say thank you, because, you know, back then the price of phone calls is just ridiculous. We did catch the security guard sleeping on a few occasions because, you know, it gets boring doing that all day every day, especially when nothing happens. Oh, we also had a maid. Yeah, I know this sounds really privileged. White family going to South Africa, having a maid. But we did. I think it was just part of like the villa deal, like the services they provide. And she was really nice. I can't remember if her name was Cuckoo or something like that, because my granddad made a joke to her. Well, it wasn't supposed to be a joke. He said, oh, in England we call Cuckoo a bird. It might have been a slightly different name, but she misinterpreted it. She thought he was calling her a bird, like flirting. So we had to explain it and they had a laugh about it. And that was quite funny. You know, it's interesting looking back at things that have happened the last few years, especially again, last video I mentioned about my nan passing away. And as time goes on, you kind of think more and more about how in the moment, you just live through memories. Not like they're nothing, but they're just novel for what they are, like present memories. But you look back on how valuable flashes of moments in time are like that, and you wish you could just travel back to them, just not to relive them again, but just to be around them. It would be so interesting just to go back in time and just like walk around, you know, look at the rooms, look at where we are, sit down with myself while I'm eating breakfast. Again, weird distinct memories. I had like frosted flakes. And I remember having, you know, every now and again you might get like a flake that's just way too covered in sugar and it just like hits you like a sweet blast. I remember that. I remember having a sore throat and drinking orange juice and wondering why it was burning so much. All of this stuff happened like, I don't know, 20 years ago now. So yeah, it's just something nice. So I wanted to share the story just to preserve it a little bit on the internet so it's not entirely in my head, and, you know, maybe you might find it a bit interesting. Just let me know if you made it to the end. Put some kind of emoji in the comments related to the warthog, maybe a pig, or if they've got a warthog, if you made it this far, that is. And yeah, thanks for listening. Stay safe, and I will see you next time.